our capital. No posh buildings here, no historical monuments. Ribbon development, I think they call it, out along dual carriageways. Semi-detached houses, ordinary shops. The People's Princess. That phrase which is so very apt for this young lady. Life cut so short. Now they're starting to move. I think the speed is building up a bit here, or it did when it came around that corner.
And there again, the Great West Door, the half-muffled bells still ringing. Well, the mobile phone, perhaps a reminder of the modern age that we live in and that Princess Diana so typified. The gleaming stone outside of the Great West Door, by the way, the Abbey has been through a 20-year renovation, restoration, cleaning. It only finished 2 or 3 years ago. That's Brian May in the middle, formerly of Queen, Freddie Mercury's group.
Time to spot faces in the crowd. Just all sorts of people come into view, and we mentioned much earlier that there were representatives of charities and friends. Her Christmas card list is what they looked at when they invited people. Bells peal on. People wait to leave, and back to the car, making its way out of North London.
That, if I'm not mistaken, is Hendon Way. Approaching one of London's great shopping centres, Brent Cross. And from there onto the North Circular Road. Some might say the dreaded Circular Road. Always chock-a-block. And from there up onto the M1. And in fact, we've just heard that the police are asking mourners as they begin to gather on bridges over the M1 not to throw flowers down from the bridges onto the car, or indeed drape flags, for obvious reasons. Almost hemmed in by the crowds here, as it, I think, is emerging from Hendon Way. Oh, I know, it's the slip road from Hendon Way onto the North Circular.
John, it's almost as if they don't want her to go, isn't it? Want to press forward and see her, but, you know, slow down, slow down.
Yes. As I said earlier, I don't have to believe it if I don't want to. Cavalcade of flowers. And maybe maybe there's a feeling rippling through the crowd that she's had the send-off she deserved. We did her proud. It was a funeral that involved everybody, from the humblest in the land to the highest in the land. It went without a hitch, and it was so absolutely appropriate. And everyone, I think, can be proud for having played their part. And they'll say in years to come that London, Britain, gave the princess the farewell she deserved. Well, not quite on the North Circular. I was a little ahead of myself, but very close to it.
If you live there, you will be saying to everybody you meet for the rest of your life, Princess Diana's funeral passed my front door. And that, of course, that appeal to ordinary people, which was mentioned back in Westminster Abbey, the way that she had a capacity to make everybody feel that they sort of knew her, really, and her frailties. Well, we've all got those, so that's fine. That was fine, because she's gone now. People up on the central barrier there to get a glimpse. A little bit more crowd discipline here, people back off the carriageway. Traffic stopped on the other side, I think. Piled up on the other side, just stopped there. I should imagine everyone out of their cars, out of the buses, coming across the road, if they can.
Turning now onto the North Circular, close in fact to Staples Corner, which as you'll remember was the scene of the devastating IRA car bomb in 1992, which badly damaged this flyover, which really is one of the major links between London and the North. Crowds at the back leaping to get a better view. And on to the famous, some would say notorious, North Circular Road for the short journey, just a mile or so, to the southern end of the M1. Traffic halted. Has anyone ever seen the North Circular like that? No one, I'm sure, complaining for a moment.
Amazing, really, that this funeral, this hearse will be going up the M1 motorway, of all things.
Still the crowds there. This is not a residential area, and they've left their homes to line the streets to remember this day. And applause again. I'm sure the mood now is almost one of celebration, celebrating a life. The mourning was this morning, the mourning will be forever, but for the moment they're celebrating a life. On the bridge above it,
part of the world where you often get hitchhikers trying to get a lift before the M1 begins. None of them today. There are no crowds here. The police have kept people off this particular stretch. I presume we're actually on motorway now. But this bit has been, oh yes, there's the familiar blue signs that tell us all, we all know them, you're on a motorway.
And we'll stay with the Princess until she disappears from our view onto the M1 motorway and north to Althorpe House in Northamptonshire. A brief stop to clear the flowers off. Yes, they had to do that. Obviously, it looks covered in flowers. You can't go on a motorway with your car covered in flowers, whatever your car is. So a brief stop. Leave the flowers on the hard shoulder, and no doubt they'll remain.
Those men on the left-hand side, motorway workers, I bet they didn't expect this. Flowers off from the Princess's funeral, in a way, in front of them, and the little procession moves off again, up the M1 towards the final resting place in Northamptonshire.
And that'll be our final view of Princess Diana as she leaves North London for the journey north. For the moment, our final view.
Well, we're in their hands now. Hello. You going off? All right. I shouldn't be terribly long.
And we're back outside Buckingham Palace, where the crowds will not disperse. Climbing on the railings by the looks of it. Looking at the flowers, reading some of the messages. My goodness me, look at those flowers. I think a great sense of relief that it passed so well this morning. It went so well. As I said earlier, exactly the tribute that she deserved.
Lots of smiles in the crowd now. After
Yes.
all the tears and sadness, there's a bit of smile, a bit of relief. That's so often the case at the end of a funeral, isn't it? Let's be honest about it. There is that relief. The grieving process requires the formality of a funeral. Now people beginning to relax, beginning, I suppose, the process of really believing that the princess has died. Flowers, that's Buckingham Palace, the flowers on the railings, the flowers the Queen herself looked at yesterday for the first time.
Westminster Abbey again, the bells still tolling. Richard Branson. And there's that wonderfully spruced up Great West Door, gleaming clean.
The weather so perfect, if you can use that word in connection with a funeral. Forecast of possible showers this afternoon, but it remained as sunny as possible. It could possibly have been. What a day for those crowds. We will all remember this day, of course we will, but for those who are actually on the streets of London, what memories they are going to have.
Hyde Park, where the giant screens were, where the service was followed by thousands more than were able to hear it either in the Abbey or in the streets around it. And still not dispersing, as I said earlier, probably friendships made. And for the moment, we'll leave the crowds of London in the centre of the city and in the north of the city, and we'll join the Princess later on in her journey as she nears Althorpe House in Northamptonshire. But for the moment, back to Trevor McDonald.
John, thank you very much. And as we said, we'll be returning to that commentary as the coffin is driven northwards towards Northampton. The service itself, as you would have seen, was a fitting tribute to a woman who in death brought the country together like no one else. It's already been described as a day of unforgettable images and sounds. The departure of the coffin from Kensington Palace, those haunting cries of grief as the coffin left Kensington Palace, the wreath which said in simple, boyish writing the word mummy, and the poignant sight of the Princes William and Harry walking behind the gun carriage. And then there was that emotional and uncompromising tribute to Diana from her brother during the service. He called her unique, complex, extraordinary, and irrepressible. We can now hear some comment and reflection on the ceremony. Let's go now to Julia Somerville and her guests at Westminster Abbey. Julia?
Well, Trevor, I had with me Lord Steele, who was in the congregation throughout the service. Lord Steele, somebody just said to me that they thought that the people who'd organised the service had managed to pull off the impossible. Did you feel that?
I did. I thought it was a most genuinely moving service, and it managed to combine in an extraordinary way the popular and informal with the royal. And I've never been at an occasion like it, and I'll never forget it. It was a most remarkable occasion.
I think if you like, the most heartfelt, perhaps, moment was Lord Spencer's tribute to his sister, which was both tremendously fond and very, very personal, but he was also reaching out and, if you like, laying some blame. Did you feel that he was accurate in his targets?
I don't think he overstepped the mark. I thought it was a very, very well judged tribute, and I think, as the Queen was saying in her broadcast yesterday, there's so many lessons to be learned perhaps by some sections of the press, perhaps by the royal family themselves. I think we're going to see perhaps a more informal and approachable royal family in the future as a result of Diana's influence. But most important of all, I think talking to the crowds as I was coming across from the House of Commons to the Abbey earlier, I hope that her life will have left behind some lessons of service and concern for causes that she stood for.
Today must have had a special poignancy for you because you were a Privy Councillor, were you not, at the time when Diana was just about to become engaged to the Prince of Wales?
That's right. I was one of the Privy Councillors called to the palace to approve the royal marriage. So I'd met her when she was 19 and about to enter into this extraordinarily strained and stressful public life.
Sir David Steele, Lord Steele, thank you very much indeed. Back to you now, Trevor.
From Julia Somerville, let's go now to Mark Webster in Hyde Park. Mark?
Well, here earlier, Trevor, tens of thousands of people, literally as far as the eye could see, were gathered watching the whole service on two giant screens here. They were Diana's people, if you like, a rainbow Britain, young and old, black and white, from every corner of the country. They all came here and they all shared the experience together. Now, I have with me Claire and Helen. Perhaps I'll turn to Claire first. What did you think of the service, Claire?
I thought it was a very moving service. I hate to say I enjoyed it, but I did. It was what I needed. I wanted to be able to come up here and grieve and see the service.
You were saying earlier some of what Earl Spencer had to say you thought might be a bit political.
Yes, I felt when I was listening to it, it didn't feel like a speech I expected at a funeral, but I agreed with everything he said, and I can't see a better opportunity for him to say it. We all listened, we all agreed with him, and I think our best wishes to the young princes do go out. I hope that Diana's example will continue, yeah.
Helen, I'll turn to you now. What do you think from your perspective?
Oh, I thought it was very exciting, and they had a reading in there. Mr. Blair read one that was read at my grandfather's funeral, and I thought it was quite upsetting, actually, but I felt sorry for the young princes.
Indeed. Okay, thank you. Back to Trevor.
Thank you, Mark. The cortege is now on the M1. There you can see the police outriders heading up the M1. We saw it make its way all the way through North London. And now this is actually beginning its journey to Northampton on the M1 motorway. Picking up speed now, heading for that journey up to the Spencer estate. The M1 unusually quiet, cleared by police, of course, for this procession up to Northampton. Just a very small party. As we heard, the princes will make their way by the royal train. All those flowers which were strewn on the car cleared away now for the journey up north. Just before we saw those pictures, we were talking to Mark Webster at Hyde Park. He's there now. Mark?
Indeed, I have with me from Portsmouth, Debbie, Christopher and Andy, who I know. What did you think of the service, Debbie?
I thought it was very moving. I've never experienced anything like it before in my life, and I'm glad I came up today because I felt it was the way that I could say goodbye to it. It was the only way I could get it out of my system.
Yes, you said you've been grieving all week, you've been crying a lot all week. Do you think it's helped?
It has helped, yeah. It didn't actually physically hit me until the coffin was removed from the gun carriage, and obviously that's when the realisation sunk in that she really had gone.
Christopher, what did you think?
Well, Elton John's rewrite of Candle in the Wind was very sad, and so was Earl Spencer's speech, and that was what made me cry. And then from then on I just couldn't stop crying, and that was it. And same as my mum, I had to come to get it out of my system.
Andy, it must have been the same for you. Terribly emotional experience.
It was very emotional, and as Christopher said, Candle in the Wind, and Earl Spencer's speech. Earl Spencer summed up the whole of the nation, I think, the whole of the country there with what he said.
Do you think his sentiment in particular, that the two princes should be left alone by the media, is something that everybody feels?
Yes, very much so. And the spontaneous applause that followed that, I think, summed up what everybody thought and what the country feels and how he managed to put it across.
Yes,
just
indeed.
wonderful.
I can turn back here. But, I mean, you were making the point that you thought it was a bit political, but obviously his point really is let the princes have as normal an upbringing as they possibly can.
Yes, one of my neighbours on Sunday said to me, who is going to take them to Thorpe Park? And I think that's what really moved me. Yes, my children had those opportunities. I hope those boys have the chance to do things that children do.
Yes, for you, who's had a very normal upbringing. Do you feel a lot of sympathy for the princes?
Yeah, I can't imagine like being in their place and having to do things that they do, especially just after their mums died.
And what did you think of how they acquitted themselves today?
Well, I think they were very brave out there, because I don't think I could have done that.
I think it's only fair to turn to you, Christopher, and ask you exactly the same question. What did you think of those young lads out there today?
Well, my heart just goes out to him. I feel so sorry for him. Their like, mum done everything for him. And I don't think Charles will take him to Thorpe Park, but I think William will take Harry to the pictures and everything. But their dad will take him to some places, but not all the time like their mum did.
Well, it's a thought from those people here, I say, have shared this extraordinary experience today. Trevor.
We heard how the service, thank you, Mark Webster, we heard how the service at Westminster this morning was a combination of so many things, of the public and the private, of people from all walks of life. Julia Somerville is talking some of them now.
Trevor, I have with me Chris de Burgh, who I think needs no further introduction. Chris, you were obviously in there. Tell me your feelings about the service.
Julia, that was one of the most extraordinary things I've ever been at or felt a part of. And the most moving moment for me was when Earl Spencer made his tribute to his sister. And outside the Abbey, we could hear the applause as everybody, the people power, showed itself again. And I heard the applause grow, and it came through the west door, up the aisle, and everybody started applauding within the Abbey, and it made your hair stand on end. It felt like the applause was going all the way up to Diana herself in her coffin. It was an expression of power and emotion, and at that point I lost it myself, but I've never heard people applauding in church like that, or certainly not at a funeral.
Lord Spencer's tribute to his sister was so incredibly heartfelt, and he was all the time reminding people about what a gift Diana herself had in dealing with people. Tell us how you first came to meet her.
I met her about 10 years ago when she got in touch with me about the Enniskillen disaster, and subsequently we've been in touch a lot. I remember various occasions, for example, when she came back from Argentina. The morning she got back, she wrote me a lovely note accepting an album, Beautiful Dreams, that I'd sent her, and she said at the end of the note, I could use some beautiful dreams right now. She was a very charismatic woman. She made you feel special, and she had that gift of making, it's like stardust on everybody that met her. She knew how to be a star in as much as she left something with you after she'd gone and moved away from you. She was an outstanding lady, and beautiful and vulnerable and everything that, we wanted to hold her.
Elements, of course, that are very strongly in Elton John's song, and the altered version of which we heard today. My impression was that came over incredibly powerful. Was it the same for you?
Absolutely, Julia. I was sitting a few yards away from him, and I reckon I was one of the few people in the church who, in the cathedral, who actually knew what he was going through. Shortly before I caught eye contact with him, and I gave him the thumbs up, and I said, to myself, good luck, Elton. And the words were gorgeous, and people were extremely moved at the end. I also felt then people wanted to applaud, but because we actually heard people outside applauding, but it wasn't until after Earl Spencer's tribute to his sister that the applause really crashed through the cathedral.
It's a lovely idea that the world outside and the world inside were communicating like that.
It was like a wave of love coming through, and everybody inside, I can tell, were as moved as I was.
Well, Chris de Burgh, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come and talk to us today. Back to you, Trevor, now.
Thank you, Julia. Let's go to the cenotaph now and to our political editor, Mike Brunson. Mike, I suppose the pulse of normal life is returning there?
Yes, it is. Trevor, of course, this is the centre of political power, isn't it? But it has been the most extraordinary experience to stand here with the ordinary people today and to take part in that service, because this street, with all the normally connections with politics and so on, became an open-air abbey. during that service, a huge open-air abbey all the way around here. And so 2,000 people in the abbey, 2 million people perhaps in this, what I call the open-air abbey. And it was extraordinary the way that it started with immense grief. As the service began, people were openly crying. I saw one young girl crying and then passing a tissue to an elderly security guard, for example. But I can also bear witness to what happened as being described by earlier comments, because people began then, the mood began to change, and it changed at the end of Elton John's song, because it was out here in the street that they applauded for the first time. Polite, reverential applause, if you like, but an acknowledgement of what Elton John's song had done for them, had given them strength. So that was where the applause had begun. But then, as Earl Spencer began to speak, his tribute out here in Whitehall was applauded no less than 4 times. First, when he said, "We want to thank God for Diana brightening our lives," even though he said God only gave you half a life. But then when he moved on to the part where he was starting to criticize the tabloid press, there was applause at that. First of all, when he said, why is it that they wanted to belittle Diana? Is it because they lack something themselves? It's so baffling. People applauded that. There was even bigger applause, though, when the Earl said that he made his promise to Diana when he said, "We won't allow the boys to suffer the anguish that he had to suffer." That was when the applause, quite spontaneous here, and I'm fascinated to hear that it was also that applause, spontaneous applause, outside the Abbey, which then welled up through the Abbey, so that everybody was applauding at the same time.
Michael Brunson, thank you for those observations. Joining me in the studio now, we have Robert Lacey, of course, who has been talking to us earlier this morning, and Canon Stephen Oliver. Can you give me your impression of the service first, Canon Oliver?
Yes, this was no thin secular send-off, was it? This was a deeply religious service, and I think it was one that from the very moment that you got those great sentences from the prayer book, "I am the resurrection and the life," and so on, the bedrock of Christian faith was there. But it also managed to embrace so many other sensibilities. The moment when Elton John finished singing was one of those poignant moments. The reading that the Prime Minister did, I thought, was just wonderful. I mean, the way in which he captured that and gave it such energy and verve, right the way through to the moment that the Dean finally commended Diana to the care and to the love of God. And then somewhere in there was that very carefully crafted tribute by her brother. Carefully crafted because he started by talking to Diana and gradually moved to talking to her sons and then to the wider world. And I thought that that was one of the most moving things, the comprehensive prayers of the Archbishop, and then that moment when the choir came in after that with London Derriere. I mean, it was just perfectly captured everything that the Archbishop was trying to say.
Robert Lacey, I think this is the point that people are going to remember about the service, or one of the points they're going to remember about the service, the way the Earl Spencer made the point about keeping the boys, he said, duty and so on, fine, but they must also be like their mother. They must also have that touch of the ordinary person. It was quite an extraordinary and pointed point he made there.
Oh, it was the high point, and we've been searching all week for words to express what we feel, and I think if there was one set of words that did it, it was that, and I think actually his secular words, frankly, rather transcended everything else. He knew her, knows her better than anybody else. He talked about her intuition. He explained her. He told us new things. He coined these phrases like the constituency of the rejected that she represented, and then that comparison of Diana, the goddess of hunting, who herself was in fact hunted all her life. I felt I could understand that island now up in Northamptonshire where she's heading. I mean, the Spencers gave the girl to us and to the press and to the royal family.
Her back.
The blood family, as he called it. The blood family are taking her back.
The point about that blood family, Canon, as you were saying, is the gap is opening up, though, again. We thought when the Queen appeared and when the princes went out and talked to young people, something of a closing of ranks had been effected. But now, from what the Earl Spencer said, that gap seems to have opened up again a little bit, didn't it?
I think that there were two very interesting things. The moment at which he cracked himself, that you felt that his face was expressing all the agony the agony of the whole nation there, was the moment at which he was handing Diana on into the care and to the love of God. He actually said words very like that. But before that, what he'd done was to put a marker down. He'd actually said that the Blood family would take the responsibility that Diana herself had taken for her sons in that particular area of affection and defence and so on.
It seemed aimed at the other family there.
No, I'm sorry to break in, but I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, he made an allusion to hoping the boys would sing, I think it was, or dance. He's clearly immensely proud of what the Spencers have given now the royal family. I mean, he was talking as a great old English aristocrat, but I wouldn't interpret it as divisive in that sense.
But he was laying the marker down that they would remain with that commitment that Diana had had for her own sons, that would be part of their family responsibility.
As the little boy said, maybe he's the one who's going to take them to Thorpe Park now.
Robert Lacey, Canon Oliver, thank you very much. Let's go to join my colleague Adrian Britton now on Carriage Road. Adrian?
Yes, Trevor, what you can see behind me are the crowds who are leaving Hyde Park, having just watched that service, virtually in tearful silence, all races, creeds and ages. I saw a couple over on the lawn, arms around each other, just crying, particularly when the Elton John song was sung. And I think what everybody feels here, and that is despite the vast numbers who are here, they didn't feel as though they were attending a large-scale, public, solemn occasion. But because of their intense feelings towards the princess, they all felt they were attending a private funeral. Let me just turn to some of them here. So what did you think of the service?
It was excellent, very good, especially the Elton John song. It was very heartbreaking. They made it really well.
What did you think of the Earl Spencer's tribute?
Very good, well put together. In such a short time. Very good.
And the lady to your side, anything in particular which you found particularly moving?
Earl Spencer's speech. That was really moving, yes.
In what way?
I think what he said was exactly how Diana was. And I could understand that. And it moved me.
Let me just move to a lady at your back who are holding flowers. Presumably you're on your way to Kensington Palace.
Yes, I am. I'm on my way to Kensington Palace with some flowers and some poems that the girls at school wrote yesterday. They felt quite touched and moved by the occasion, and I brought them along today to leave them at the palace gates for Prince William and Harry.
And what did you think of the service?
I thought it was excellent. In such a short time, so many moving statements and sentiments came across. I think everyone was feeling the same, and I think what Earl Spencer said and what Elton John sang was superb.
And the lady to your left? Anything in particular which struck you? Anything particularly moving that you found?
Elton John's song. It was Elton John's song.
Elton John's song. Let's just move over here. I mean, more flowers still. I can't imagine that there is a single growing flower left in this country, having seen so many flowers this week. Anything in particular which you found moving?
The speech.
The speech?
Yeah.
You found it quite powerful?
Yeah, and the song also.
Thank you very much. Trevor, that really does sum up the expression of the intense feeling here. With that, I'll hand you back to the studio.
Thank you very much indeed. As we've been saying, the speech, perhaps by Earl Spencer, the speech would transcend a great deal of what was said and heard at that service this morning. Let's just remind ourselves again what the Earl Spencer said.
There is no doubt that she was looking for a new direction in her life at this time. She talked endlessly of getting away from England, mainly because of the treatment that she received at the hands of the newspapers. I don't think she ever understood why her genuinely good intentions were sneered at by the media, why there appeared to be a permanent quest on their behalf to bring her down. It is baffling. My own and only explanation is that genuine goodness is threatening to those at the opposite end of the moral spectrum. It is a point to remember that of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this: a girl given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting was, in the end, the most hunted person of the modern age. She would want us today to pledge ourselves to protecting her beloved boys, William and Harry, from a similar fate. And I do this here, Diana, on your behalf. We will not allow them to suffer the anguish that used regularly to drive you to tearful despair. And beyond that, on behalf of your mother and sisters, I pledge that we, your blood family, will do all we can to continue the imaginative and loving way in which you are steering these two exceptional young men, so that their souls are not simply immersed by duty and tradition, but can sing openly as you planned. We fully respect the heritage into which they have both been born, and will always respect and encourage them in their royal role. But we, like you, recognize the need for them to experience as many different aspects of life as possible, to arm them spiritually and emotionally for the years ahead. I know you would have expected nothing less from us. William and Harry, we all care desperately for you today. We're all chewed up with sadness at the loss of a woman who wasn't even our mother. How great your suffering is, we cannot even imagine. I would like to end by thanking God for the small mercies he's shown us at this dreadful time, for taking Diana at her most beautiful and radiant, and when she had joy in her private life. Above all, we give thanks for the life of a woman I'm so proud to be able to call my sister, the unique, the complex, the extraordinary and irreplaceable Diana, whose beauty, both internal and external, will never be extinguished from our minds.
And after that speech by Earl Spencer, there was actually applause in Westminster Abbey, and I suppose around the country, as there was also in Hyde Park. We saw it on those monitors. And I think there's some pictures now, helicopter pictures, of the cortege making its way up the M1. Still some way to go to Northampton, but now picking up pace, or having picked up pace. Just a lone hearse on its way to Diana's final resting place. And still you can see the crowds are thinned out a little now, but still people on the motorway. Not something which is usually allowed by the police, but still people on the motorway paying their final respects, and on those bridges overlooking parts of the motorway. All the cars on the other side of the road have stopped. Some perhaps have been stopped by police, but others are doing it just out of respect. People are running across the bridges to get a better view. Let's now, from those pictures, go to Dermot Monaghan at our Buckingham Palace studio, perhaps picking up on that point about Earl Spencer's speech. First of all, the press and the other comments he made. Dermot?
Yes, indeed, Trevor. I'm joined by Penny Junor, the royal biographer, and Ash Wyndham, a former equerry to the Queen. Penny Junor, Earl Spencer clearly did strike a chord with the people, as Trevor said there. There was applause in Westminster Abbey. We heard the applause ourselves outside Buckingham Palace.
Yes, I must say I was disappointed by his speech, by his address. The service had been so moving and so filled with love and warmth and shared grief, and suddenly, I mean, he was so angry, and I understand his anger, but for me, it injected a very sour note in what had been a very beautiful service.
Ash Wyndham, how do you feel that the royal family will have reacted to the Earl's speech?
I think they would have understood the sentiment behind it. I think the service itself was a wonderfully crafted bit of work, and combining the ancient and the modern, I think it did great justice to Diana, Princess of Wales.
The whole day, the whole occasion really reflected that, didn't it? The formal mixing very easy with the informal. Did it really show that royal protocol can evolve and adapt and meet the people's needs and requirements?
Absolutely. We've only got to look behind us now, and you'll see the Union Jack is still flying at half-mast from the standard at Buckingham Palace, and the Royal Standard has not yet been put up. I'm sure that that is a good indication of how the Queen and the remainder of the royal family feel about this.
Penny Junor, just reflecting further on the Earl's address there, that's accommodation almost that he sketched out between the royal family and the Spencer family about bringing up the young Princes William and Harry. Do you think that can actually work?
Well, I mean, I think the Prince of Wales will do a very good job in bringing up his sons. And I think that was another sort of unnecessarily sour note, I thought, to suggest that it would be her family who would perhaps take over and do the things with them which Diana had wanted for them, which seemed to be as though they were incompatible with the sort of things that the royal family would do with them. I mean, if this is how he's feeling, I just don't think now is the moment to say it.
Well, Ash Wyndham, one thing was glaringly obvious about the whole day was the way those young princes conducted themselves behind their mother's coffin. Extraordinary decorum and bearing there.
Yeah, it's very brave. Young Prince Harry is slightly out of step with the rest, not quite matching his father's footsteps.
Almost eager to get it over and done with, perhaps.
Yes, a pace or two ahead on many occasions. It must have been a very grueling ordeal, and one which they're still going through.
And sorry.
No, I was just going to say that being slightly out of step and walking a bit too quickly reminded me very much of the Princess of Wales's first tour of Wales after the marriage, which was her first walkabout, really, as Princess of Wales. And she was very like that, walking slightly too fast and getting out of step and being all legs and you know, eager. And clearly he was, I mean, totally different circumstances. But it was...
Still a memory to treasure.
A memory to treasure.
Penny Junor, Ash Wyndham, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Dermot Monaghan at our Buckingham Palace studio. The focus of the service was, of course, at Westminster Abbey, but there were people in Hyde Park watching the service, following every moment of it on those huge screens, and they made an incredible picture. Let's go now to Joe Andrews, who is at Hyde Park Corner.
Most of the people here are now leaving silently and quite quietly. A number of people who spent all night here, in fact, have been catching up with some sleep on the lawns in the sunshine. But 3 people who listened to all of that service are with me now. 3 young people who came this morning from Croydon. Becca, what did you think of the service?
I thought it was brilliant. I especially liked Earl Spencer's speech and Elton John's song with the new verse.
When you grow up, what will you tell your own children about today? What's the thing you're going to remember most of all?
Just how everyone was in touch with each other and like helping each other, like the younger children get into the front and that. I just thought it was wicked.
And next to Becca is Louis. Louis, where did you come from this morning?
I've come all the way from Croydon.
And what did you think of the service?
I thought that the service was superb and that everyone loves Diane very much, and my favourite bit was the national anthem.
Why?
It was so touching to my heart.
What's the bit that you're going to remember most?
The national anthem.
And next to Louis is Marsha. Marsha, what about you? What did you think of it?
It was really nice, and everyone was like paying their respect coming down here and that. My best part was Elton John's song. Everyone stood up and paid their respect and clapped and that.
Do you feel that it's helped you, this service?
Yeah, she'll always be remembered.
How would you like to remember her best?
Just, don't know, just as a loving person, friendly, and everyone loved her.
Thank you. Trevor, back to you.
Joe Andrews with some young people talking about this morning's memorable service. And one of the most memorable aspects of it, the one that people will talk about for a long time, was that revised version of the old Elton John classic, Candle in the Wind. Let's remind ourselves what it sounded like.
Goodbye, England's rose. May you ever grow in our hearts. You were the grace that placed yourselves where lives were torn apart. You called out to our country and you whispered to those in pain. Now you belong to heaven and the stars spell out your name. And it seems to me you lived your life like a candle in the wind, never fading with the sunset when the rain set in. And your footsteps will always fall here along England's greenest hills. Your candles burned out long before your legend ever will. Loveliness we've lost, those empty days without your smile. This torch we'll always carry for our nation's golden child. Even though we try, the truth brings us to tears. All our words cannot express the joy you've brought us through the years. And it seems to me you've lived your life like a candle in the wind, never fading with the sunset when the rain set in. And your footsteps will always fall here along England's greenest hills. Your candles burned out long before your legend ever will. Goodbye, England's rose. May you ever grow in our hearts. You were the grace that placed yourselves where lives were torn apart. Goodbye, English road, from a country lost without your soul, who missed the wings of your compassion more than you will ever know. And it seems to me you've lived your life like a candle in the wind, never fading with the sunset when the rain set in. And your footsteps will always fall here along England's greenest hills. Your candles burned out long before your legend ever will.
Elton John, he was singing there Goodbye English Rose, although we thought the word should be Goodbye England's Rose. More pictures now from the cortege making its way up the motorway. Seems to have slowed down a bit now. 3 police cars in attendance behind. As you heard, the royal princes are in fact, the young princes are in fact making their way there to the Spencer estate by the royal train. The hearse is going up on the motorway virtually on its own. Outriders and police protection officers. And again, the crowds surge forward. I think it was known that on the streets of North London there'll be hundreds of thousands of people. But I wonder whether anybody anticipated how many there might be on the motorway. And the applause that we heard earlier in London this morning, again. And the crowd seemed to stretch as far as the eye could see. Just about to lose sight of it now, fading away into the distance on its way up to the Spencer estate. Back here in the studio, Canon Stephen Oliver, Dean of St. Paul's, and Robert Lacey. Canon Oliver, first of all, we talked a lot about the service. Can I just take you back to some moments before the service actually began? Those shots of the Queen with her head bowed as the coffin passed Buckingham Palace. All the members of the royal family, or so many members of the royal family, standing there.
Quite unprecedented. I mean, we'd never seen pictures like that before, and I think that the comment was made that around the world people would be looking at those pictures and thinking that that was fairly normal, but for us it wasn't. It was an astonishing picture of royal humility.
And give us a sense, in your words, of what you thought the significance of that was.
I think that that was royal humility. I think that that was the royal family bowing before the truth of what Diana had meant to the people of this country and making some symbolic gesture that was very powerful. Once we'd gone on just beyond that and the royal princes and Prince Charles and Prince Philip joined that cortege going towards the Abbey, there wasn't a dry eye in the house here, I have to say, that there were people weeping openly. And I think that that speaks volumes as to the power of that particular moment leading up to the service.
Yes, they were all gathered there. And then, of course, Robert Lacey, as the canon said, the poignancy of the princes and the Duke of Edinburgh walking along with them. And occasionally you could see the Earl Spencer, or the father Prince Charles, occasionally comforting one of the boys. What must have been an extraordinary ordeal for them.
Yes, it was a very important symbolic act, because it's well known that in the conflicts within the family, the Duke of Edinburgh has been particularly on the other side when it came to some of the arguments. I like the naturalness of it, the fact that the royal family just came out of their house, as it were. It was an echo of yesterday, when the Queen turned up at Buckingham Palace gates and sort of stopped and said, goodness, what's been going on here? Sort of an acknowledgement of having been out of touch, but moved and wanting to participate in getting straight out.
This, in fact, was where there was that intersection between what one would consider sort of royal protocol and the kind of life that Diana actually lived and what she came to represent.
Yes, exactly. And if people take offence at what Lord Spencer said, it's because I think that's the sort of speech that Diana herself would have given, the sort of speech that might have offended some people, but which really captured her essence.
Canon, we talked about it before, but are you happy with Elton John singing in one of your great churches?
I'm more than happy. I have said so all week. The amazing thing about Elton John is that you read words like that, and on the page they don't seem to be particularly profound or moving. But put it with his music, and in a context like a great abbey or a cathedral with its resonances and those great crowds of people, and all of a sudden it is very powerful. And it's powerful in a religious sense, I think. It reaches to the very depths of what human beings are feeling. And I think it worked brilliantly, particularly where it came at that particular moment.
I thought the Archbishop was particularly interesting because he took the care and trouble to mention the other person who died, or one of the other people who died in this crash, Dodi Al-Fayed.
Yes, he mentioned both, actually. He mentioned Dodi and the driver. And I think that was a very sensitive thing to do. And there was a point later on in the prayers where he acknowledged all sorts of things that were going on. He wasn't on script, as it were, at that point. He was praying from the heart, and I think that that came through. You could see by the way in which people were bowing their heads in the park and outside the Abbey, the way that they were singing. I suspect they were singing the hymns better outside the Abbey than they were in, to be honest. But you could see in which the way in which everybody was together in that service, and it was a very real and deep religious moment for them.
Canon, for the moment, thank you very much. Robert Lacey, for the moment, thank you. As the funeral car makes its way north, Tim Ewart is in Northamptonshire at the village of Duston near Althorpe Park. Tim?